we have an official debate happening. We have King Therapist and we have CoolDog. For this debate, King Therapist is holding the proposition that Gen Z is a spoiled generation and are too sensitive, and they create unnecessary issues which the rest of humanity has to deal with. CoolDog's taking the opposition. As always, when will be based upon who concedes. If we don't get a vocal concession from either participant, we'll put it to a voting poll in which you, the audience, can decide on who you think performed better overall in the debate. No time limit. Thank you both for debating. You can get started.
Okay, so cool dog, if you don't mind, I'll take the first go at this.
I mean, I think it's only appropriate since you're like the affirmative or whatever.
Yes. So what I'm trying to establish here is that we have certain generations. We have the millennials, the boomers, Gen Alpha, and Gen Y and stuff. Uh, Gen Z is from 1995 to 2010, and I've watched and experienced myself how spoiled, rotten, and just way too sensitive these young humans are being, and just gonna grow up to be failures if they continue this. It has to do with a lot of factors, um, like parenting, social media, like the influences they get, their education. Uh, I'll try and tackle every single point individually because it is quite the broad topic. So first of all, I'll go over the general issues which I see with Gen Z. So Gen Z is, in my opinion, lacking parenting, good parenting, and lacking general knowledge, and they get influenced way too less. The world evolved to a certain point where a lot of parents don't have the time to spend with their kids, so they give them a phone so they're entertained. But at and I see that at this point in time, the internet is more parenting than the parents, and that should be changed. And I think I'll end my opening statement with that.
Okay. Again, I'd like to thank the rather large audience we have today for sitting through this, as well as therapist who's always a great interlocutor, and looking forward to first debate of the year. So thank you all for that. And so let's sort of dive into this and sort of my main contention is going to be that Gen Z and every generation, as you're kind of mentioning, faces its own unique set of problems. And so I think that we should be, looking at these terms from a relative perspective. And I think that the Gen Z crowd, due to these social media and due to their increased access to information, even at a younger age, the reason why they initially come off as being, quote, spoiled or creating unnecessary issues, it's just because they're becoming aware of many issues that have like laid dormant or weren't really considered to be real issues in previous generations. So that's you complain about their complaining, but in fact it's actually a good thing in my opinion that we are getting social awareness of various different problems. Thinking of some unique problems that make them not spoiled would be something like global warming or like racial issues that are coming to sort of a forefront now. So I don't necessarily view them as necessarily being you know, complaining about nothing. I mean, I would be somewhat tempted to agree with you that the phone as a babysitter is a bad idea, right? I think that there are benefits, but I also think that the fact that you're outlining these harms that it's causing people means that, having these addictive social media platforms introduced at such a young age is a very difficult thing that Gen Zers are going to have to deal with, right? I don't think that that makes them spoiled. I just think it's like a unique challenge that they have to deal with, as well as the fact that every generation thinks that the last generation had it, you know, you know the newest generation always has this better than their parents. And you could talk to a boomer about how their parents in the Great Depression really had it hard and how boomers are spoiled. So I don't think that this is a unique thing that you're really pointing out. I don't think that you're uniquely spoiled or uniquely complaining, if that makes any sense. I guess I'll pass it off to you, unless you wanted to go more into like the specifics, as you mentioned. I think you mentioned about like education, and then if you want to talk about the social media stuff directly, or we could just debate about the specifics of the parenting if you wanted to.
Can go over all the points at
Yeah,
one.
yeah.
Like an issue that I find, and I did some digging. Gen Z is found out to be the most unhappy generation, also being the one with the most suicides on its count, or the most with depression. And this is something I'd really like to dive into. Depression as a mental illness, let's walk about 20 years back, was a not so common but like a real illness. Nowadays, I see, if I go on Instagram, I see every third, at least every third Gen Zer in my age. I'm so sad. I see the TikToks like, I wanna die, I cut myself. Like, I can't take these people serious because some of them I know, but also like we've faced worse than this. The pandemic is a good reason to have a depression. Like, that's a cause for it. But even before that, the amount of depression, so-called depression, is like, for me, depression as a real illness has lost its potency, its value as a illness. Like, basically, you can go to your doctor, say you feel really bad at this and this point, and you think about suicide, blah blah blah. He'll just stamp you off with depression, and you can get medicine for that. Why would you want to get medicine for that? What you need is some good counseling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have anything more on that? Because I have an answer to this.
Yeah, I'd like to hear your answer to that.
Yeah, so like again, maybe I mean again, we have an and statement here in the proposition. I think what you're pointing towards means that they're like uniquely not spoiled, right? The fact that the suicide rate is so high, right, seems to be that they're having a tough go of it, right? And there are these unique challenges for Gen Z that they're having problems sort of mentally with it. And so I don't really take that to be necessarily spoiled. Now, when you're talking about people being oversensitive, you do point out the fact that you can't take these people seriously. And I'm tempted to agree that there is like this clout chasing or clout goblin phenomenon of people trying to garner sympathy points on social media. Like that's definitely something that's true, right? But I don't necessarily think that that makes the person too sensitive. They're just sort of using the fact that it tugs at your heartstrings to get attention. So if it isn't real depression, doesn't that like cut against your point in that they're not really that too sensitive? They're really just putting on this show to get people to like them, right?
With the sensitivity, I meant like more like saying certain words, or being being critical thinking. If I say I really disapprove of this person out of this and this reason,
Hmm.
I've been attacked for that. I've been you're a sexist, you're a racist, because I said that. Why the fuck did Obama get a Nobel Peace Prize even if he bombarded the Iraqi and stuff? Like,
Yeah, but this
I was stamped a
sure.
racist for that.
I mean, sure, we could. I mean, I would potentially agree with you that drone striking tons of innocent civilians is not worthy of a peace prize. And I don't think that that's necessarily a racist point. But I mean, this type of stuff has been going on, since Archie Bunker and All in the Family between like Vietnam protesters and the Boomer generation, right? Or the generation before them, right? Like this has been going on where we have certain people will hold certain more like we'll call it progressive or different opinions that conflict with sort of the already established social norms because we're constantly in a flux. We're always moving from one sort of social order to the next one, and social norms change, and opinions about what is racist or what is worthy of a peace prize change over time as well. What would be considered a peace prize now may not be what it was previously. And there's always this clash between generations and types of thought. I don't see why this is unique to Gen Z in particular. I don't see why they're spoiled or are creating unnecessary issues. I think that they're trying to grapple with issues that previously weren't as grappled with, like racism. They're trying to figure out what that word actually means and what racism actually is. So of course you're gonna have people who make mistakes and so forth and go too far off the deep end. But that happens with everybody. I don't see that as a Gen Z problem.
Okay, I can further dive into that.
Yeah, go
So,
for it.
uh, what an add-on to that is Gen Z, for me also, big talk, 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 go out for a little protest, and it's done. Done. That's basically what I've seen so far. Sure, climate change and stuff like they're very self-aware. I think in my research I found that Gen Z is the most self-conscious one, and I'll admit they're the ones who really try and look for the issues that lurk in the depth of societies. That's good to pinpoint those, but where it's failing is that Gen Z is spoiled to a degree. They get everything due to lack of parenting, due to lack of knowledge. Like, I'd say, like, also in my research, I found that Gen Z are smarter, uh, are quite smart, but they don't overtake millennials. Like, millennials to this point have the highest IQ and are the most intelligent generation. Um, and it definitely reflects on the Gen Z. But there surely are some misses in Gen Z, without a doubt. Um, but like just the lack of parenting and all these other factors, their influences, their friends, it being like you said a cloud chase, and trying to fit in, is it's rendering them somewhat stupid, so to speak.
Well, I mean, I just kind of want to run the scenario by you. Archie Bunker, part of the greatest generation or the GI generation, World War II people, right?
Mm.
He would say, "Oh, look at these meathead protesters who are the baby boomers, right? All they do is talk, 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 go to a protest, and that's done. All they do is take their psychedelic drugs and smoke weed all day, and they're not good for nothing. They don't do any work, and that's all that they do." I think that this is something that we definitely saw during like the Vietnam War protests. So I don't think this talk, talk, talk protest thing really rings true. Unless you're trying to say something like the things that the current generation is protesting aren't like legitimate as like the Vietnam War. Again, I come from an American perspective, so can't necessarily talk about like the European social movements. Um, and then when we're talking about the social media stuff, I mean, I'm in full agreement with you. Social media and Facebook makes you stupid. I'm gonna 100% agree with you on that. But I mean, it is your problem, um, insofar as the social media is like a unique problem, or is it that we can find analogous things for like previous generations? Like there were tons of stupid fads and stupid comic books and other sort of stupid lowbrow media that people consumed and produced and so forth in previous generations. Maybe just the fact that it's more public and easily accessible and the fact that you're like living through it now is sort of making it more feel more impactful than it was in previous generations. Does that sort of make sense to you, what I'm trying to say here? Maybe?
Yeah, somewhat sense. Uh, well, what I differentiate from the Vietnam War to the thing is the Vietnam War was a little bit protested at the beginning, but once you got those terrible pictures from photographs from there, it started off real bad. We don't. It's that's where my too sensitive argument comes in,
Mm.
or just very sensitive, is like it takes a little push, it's a little tiny push, and you get a boulder, a ravine rolling down, and and at the end the the boulder doesn't cause any damage, like it didn't impact any. Like the only thing I could see where there's some real impact is going to be the climate change thing, but I'd say it didn't necessarily need this from the this giant protest movements to come forth with that. And another issue, like you're in America, so this will be very current for you. The
Mhm.
Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, and this is exactly why I like bringing up the Vietnam War protest, right? And I think that you're spot on target here by saying that the war footage, especially when it came out in color, right, of actual war situations, is what spawned the protests, right? And I think that we see an analogous thing going on when we talk about like George Floyd and now the
Yes.
prevalence of body cams and things like that. It's just, and also the movement is relatively new in comparison before it took years for sort of the Vietnam War to the protests to really start actualizing types of changes, and eventually pull out. And so I think that we're just sort of in the tip of the iceberg here, and this summer in particular was sort of like a break point where we starting to get with this technology, which you think is making people soft and terrible, right, is really giving us great benefit because it's allowing us to have this type of video footage and hold people accountable. And that's what I think that this is about. And then of course I'll just argue that it takes time for these protests to really actualize change. We have to get these old congressmen out who don't really understand social media in order to regulate it, and congressmen who aren't as sensitive to sort of these policing issues. It's just going to take time for these protests to actually affect political change.
Okay, well, I get your point completely, but my argument to that would be the Black Lives Matter as an idea has been around here for 50 years. It's been around for Vietnam War with Martin Luther King.
Well, yeah.
It was just another name. The basic idea was still the same. So I'd actually even attack the generations which protested for that and joined for those protests for not continuing. Like it's it's been basically so long nothing on something we see, like the George Floyd video. That's a perfect example.
Hmm.
That if we don't see anything like that, it just flushes away. And I bet that the George Floyd video in 1 year, no shit, no fly will remember it. Maybe only the hardcore protesters will still remember that.
Oh, I don't think that. I mean, like, I can still, like, people still reference Rodney King, for example,
Mm.
and people still talk about Trayvon Martin, right? It's still a talking point.
Yeah. But do you see what the point what I'm making is like
Well, I
the
mean,
Black Lives, the climate change, yeah, that's new. I get that. I'll give you that
mhm.
one. But I won't give you the Black Lives Matter one because that's been around here for 50 years.
Well, I mean, the
So,
sort of the other point that we could make about like these social media technologies, and it's funny because I was doing planning for my dissertation, critiquing them for similar points to yours actually, but taking up the mantle to defend it. um I think that, like, to a certain extent, the reason why you're seeing more people whine and complain, in your words, is the fact that now people have a platform to voice their opinions and to socially organize. Like Twitter and these other social medias were instrumental in actual like Arab Spring type stuff, which actually led to radical political change, for better or for worse, right? But I think that the ability for these social media platforms to group together people, to exchange ideas and so forth, is actually sort of a positive thing that is unique to Gen Z. And the what you call whining and complaining is just the newer generation of younger people coming into their own, and it's just more public than it was before. I don't think that people have really changed as much as you think they have. Um, it, I mean, I think that the it's just a exposure and publicity type of thing, as opposed to being like a change in a person's psychology or ontology or whatever.
okay. So yeah, I'll give you. I'll definitely say the internet is perfect for voicing out. The issue I have with it is then to talk, nothing comes.
Mm,
That's the problem I see with the Gen Z. Like I'd say, I'd have to differentiate in the Gen Z. Like, sure, in my proposition, I basically said the whole Gen Z. But if I now take a closer look at this, we'd have to determine early and late Gen Z. Because
Sure.
I myself am Gen Z, and I've made uh, personal, sort of, I saw it from myself, the issues. By the way, what generation are you?
I'm a millennial.
Okay.
I'm a later millennial. And I assume you're an earlier Gen Z person. I assume.
Um, I'd say I'm at the verge. I'm basically in the middle of Gen Z.
Okay.
Maybe rather late.
Well, yeah, like something to consider though is like even as a like later millennial, for example, like I'm still pretty young, right? So like younger people don't have as much power to change the world as I think you expect them to. I mean, some of these people in Gen Z aren't even in college yet, you
True.
know.
But the thing is, if you protest, then keep on doing it. Like, where's the will to it? Like, I always hear, if there's a will, there's a way.
Right.
But I see a lack of will in Gen Z, or at least early Gen Z. I'll dispute that, but I'd say after point 24, I'd say, yeah, that's where it gets downhill.
Excuse
But
me,
for
sorry.
voicing our but for voicing our opinion and for all that stuff, the internet is great. But I don't want to see a 2, 3 year old. That sure that one's now Gen Alpha, but uh,
Mhm.
I don't want to see a 2, 3 year old with an iPad in his phone. Like, where's the logic to that? And that's where the parenting. That's where they're spoiled because parents think, okay, I am lacking in time for this child, so I'll compensate in giving him objective things like a PS or a computer or I don't know shit. Like, where are the kids that go out into the forest, make a hut, and play Indians and West, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I get what you're saying, but I mean, yeah, I think like but we could say the same thing about like I don't know, like the greatest generation, GI generation again, I'm bringing it up again. They lived through the Great Depression, right? You know, so
Mhm.
they're going to look down at the baby boomers, right? And you should watch the show All in the Family. Watch a couple episodes. Might give you some perspective on what people thought about these two generations, right? They would say the exact same thing about the baby boomers. They're spoiled. They have everything, right? You know, I was remembering my great uncle said, you know, a toy for us was a brick, you know, and you know the
Right.
baby boomers have it all made, right? So you know, I don't think that this is a unique thing. I just think that the scenery has changed, but everything stays the same, right? Like the iPad is just a replacement for, you know, an Atari or a replacement for TV shows and cartoons, right? Like you could definitely hear you know, even my dad who's like older, I guess older baby boom he would be. Yeah, I think so. Older baby boom. It was like TV wasn't something that he necessarily had access to, and you know he would be someone who could potentially say that the Gen X people, the generation after, were spoiled because they could sit in front of the TV all day. So I don't see this as being a unique thing. It's just something different that is, you know, a different challenge. I don't see it as uniquely spoiled or whatever.
Um, one thing I'd say is unique. I'd say I'll admit it's a bit changing the scenery, but what was in I think everything like even in your millennial, I bet when you grew up, you went outside. Your parents told you go outside, play
Well,
with your
yeah.
friends.
Well, yeah.
And I'd say I was basically lucky enough to still be around. Like that's I saw a TikTok where it said, "Don't tell the '90s kids and don't tell the 2010 kids." But we had it the best. We grew up in nature, and we're the first generation to really get into phones, really, to be the social media thing. And I think I really felt that because I was lucky enough to go outside, but that's something that later Gen Z is lacking completely. Not going outside, just being on the screen 24/7.
So I
And
think that there's also like a class distinction to make here and like different groups of people have different parenting styles. I cycle around the place that I live a lot, and I see that in like poorer, both Hispanic and sort of African American communities, those kids do play outside more. But if you do cycle around like the the middle class white communities, what you're saying is, I will anecdotally at least correct. I'll agree to that. That more people are sort of staying inside. On the other hand, right, we need like the power of nerds, right? Steve Jobs, Romero, John Carmack, these great people who made Steve Jobs, for example, even. These are the nerds who did stay inside, and they changed the world, right? They changed the world by being acquainted with technology, and because their parents sort of supported them to learn about these technologies, it sort of inspired them to learn coding, to learn computers. So I don't think that, just, I mean, of course, there's bad form, which I agree with you on. Sitting your kid in front of YouTube or Facebook instead of parenting them is bad and wrong. But I don't think just the simple fact that people are, or children, and or Gen Zers or Gen Alpha people, young Gen Alpha people, I guess, um, are sort of more like phone zombies or whatever, is inherently necessarily a bad thing. There's a sense in which sometimes that could be a good thing if it's done correctly and done right. But
Done correctly. I think I could bring in a good example. Pokemon Go.
yeah,
That's a good example for phone zombies. Like that wasn't just Gen Z, but it was quite a good chunk of Gen Zers running on the street and being driven over by a car.
but at least they were outside, which is what you wanted, right?
Yes, but I think we can both agree that living is better than catching a Pikachu.
Well, yeah, I agree with you, but again, the toys have
Yeah.
changed. Like, it's just a change in toy. I don't see. I mean, I need an argument for why these video games, social media is uniquely bad than to, I don't know, like another show you should watch, Freaks and Geeks, right? The kids at Freaks and Geeks, they just go around and they smoke weed and talk gossip to each other. I don't see how that's uniquely different, for that generation. And that was like late 80s, I believe.
So
Um,
I'll come back to the nature point. That's I can totally say that's unique. That's being lost. Going outside into the nature and experiencing the
mhm.
world as it is different than hopping onto your screen, chit-chatting with your friends there. Like, sure you have a social contact, but that's not physical at all. That's not like you type in some buttons, that's it, and you talk over the microphone. But humans are that we are animals which seek other same animals. We seek each other. And I think for a good education, for a good growing up, you have to have the physical contact. That's why school is important in that regard. But we can come to school later because that's gonna be a big chunk.
Yeah, yeah, we should probably, because we've already been going for like 30 minutes,
40
should probably
minutes.
pivot to the school stuff off the social media.
Yeah.
So I do agree with you that, just sort of finally closing on that, I do kind of agree with you that there is something about the physical contact which is different, and there is something about nature being lost. I think that there is something to that, but I don't see how that makes them spoiled, right? It seems like they're disadvantaged. They're not spoiled. They'd be doing a grave disservice. So it's like the opposite of being spoiled. Like you wouldn't call a heroin addict spoiled, would you?
No,
Because
but yeah. But
because
spoiled, I
they're
mean like getting all everything. Like if it's like what I said with parents not being able or just not interested enough in their kids, they just give them shit. That being spoiled. Like I bet even you had to earn, you had to do something, you had to do chores or
yeah,
somewhat to get a toy or something like that. I even had to do that.
yeah, right.
Later Gen Z doesn't have to do shit because of the lack of parents or other effects. Like that's a point I'd make. But yeah, I give it to you that internet has positive and negatives, but the negatives
Mhm.
are staying like day and night.
Yeah. Okay. I think we have beat around sorry, ring around the rosy of the social media stuff for a
Mm,
while. So if you want to talk about education, we can.
okay. So we'll have to take this now globally. This is going to be a big
Okay.
chunk. So I come out of Switzerland. My education system works, I'd say, quite well for this generation, but in general, the global school system is bullshit and has to be redone completely for Gen Z and all these generations to fully unfold potential. I definitely see in every a human or every Gen Zer a certain potential, great potential, but school is holding back. The school, what you're being taught is holding you back, and that's a point that I'd found in my research. Gen Zers are more likely to go off on their own and find stuff and learn freely than in school, and I myself can say that for myself too. um, so that's something that's good for the Gen Z, but school is school and you should be taught. If you lack this school, you'll get bored out of language, and personal through the personal experience, I see that a lot of drop out of school. A lot of people ditch school. They start with smoke and they start with drinking when they should not. When they should be focusing on getting their future in the hands. If the foundation is not laid for a life, your life, the foundation will crumble. It's basically built out of paper. You just need to blow it and it will fall apart. That's why school is important, and it has to be really worked out well so you can have a really good cement foundation on which you can build your future and life upon.
Could you like elaborate a little bit more about like what's causing this? Like what's bad about the Gen Z and I guess Alpha generation now? What's like wrong with the current school system or education system?
It's just it's not adapted to to Generation Z and Gen Alpha. It's like it's the same since 100 years. I could technically just show you a video of Prince EA. Maybe you've heard of him. Him battling, him being in a courtroom talking about school stuff. I could probably link it. Give me a
Yeah, I
second.
would be interested in that. I won't watch it during the debate, but I will
Yes.
watch that video. That would be cool. Um, so like this lack of adaption, like what is that specifically?
Um, I'd say it's just the shift of knowledge. Like we're still learning math, we're still learning geometry, but where is that needed? Where do I need French? Like tell me where I need the French. Like I'd say basic stuff like language, math, and history, and going into depth into subjects. Those are key stuff. That's stuff that I had in my school, and I'm thankful for each and everything. And I was luckily I got my primary school was so kind. They had computers that we were allowed to use PowerPoints for
Mhm.
presentations then already. I'm thankful for that because I need a lot of that now. So basically, the whole school system would have to adapt to this technological standpoint and just monitor it correctly and just stop teaching bullshit you don't need in 10 years anymore. Stop teaching about real stuff like showing how to do taxes. That's something that's completely missing. Showing some philosophy in base school. You do why do I have to go to college to learn about philosophy? If like school is there for me to they're here to teach that to me because the Gen Z is also quite a lazy one. Like either you have a very lazy person in Gen Z or you have a very engaged person in Gen Z. And the engaged person will surely, okay, this is philosophy. Oh, I like this. I'll go and dive a little bit more deeper. The lazy one will say, what the fuck's Shakespeare? I want to
Mhm.
listen to some Lil Nas.
Okay. Uh, that's kind of funny.
Yes.
Um, so yeah, so I kind of do agree with you that with the rise of technology and each generation, the demands of education is going to be different, right? I definitely agree with you. I also agree with you that I think that schools should teach more life skills and how to do your taxes. I think that would be a great replacement for some types of I need to actually remember the whole curriculum for like high school and middle school and so forth. Um, so I might not as be able to give as strong a defense of this as possible. But I do think that we do see like movements toward that. I think especially now with the pandemic, right? We certainly are pivoting to more technological literacy, we'll call it, with the fact that students have to learn from home. So they're having to learn how to use a computer. Like there are tons of programs and initiatives trying to bring more computers into school. And recently we have been redoing the way that we teach math with the Common Core, for better or for worse, right? But there are these developments of in the education system to try to be more relevant to the current times, and I think that's always going to be a challenge. Um, on the laziness point, um, I mean, I think that you're gonna get that with every generation. You got the deadbeat dropout, and then you have the person who goes to Harvard, right? But what do you make of the fact that more and more people in Gen Z, for example, went to college and are going to college more than the previous generation? I think this just shows that there is this thirst for knowledge that the Gen Zers and each subsequent generation has to try to get college educated. I think the dropout rates are
Yes.
decreasing, right? So like,
Yes, I agree with that.
so what's the problem here? I think that,
Not
in
directly
fact.
a problem there. It's just the lack of adaptation that is
Mm,
here, which I'd have to pinpoint because yes, like I said, the Gen Z is probably the most self-conscious generation at the moment. Like that's what I found out in my research. And that's great. Like there are certain good things about Gen Z, but there are negatives that have to be talked about, in my opinion.
yeah, but again, I just think that these are young people who are like teenagers and whatever, and that's just what comes with being a stupid teenager, right? Like that's what happens when your brain develops. I think that's always going to be the case that the teenage generation, which is Gen Z now, right? Or the young 20s generation, which is like Gen Z now, right? They're always going to be the most self-conscious because they're finally starting to get that mental development. I don't see how this makes them uniquely spoiled or too sensitive. I mean, I just think that that's called being a teenager, right? I mean, teenagers are too sensitive by nature, but that's not like a Gen
Yes.
Z problem.
Yeah, it's not that. It's just like you said, the change of scenery, it all being online. And by the way, I do have to admit that the pandemic has definitely, I think it will have a positive and a negative after effect on this world. I think for
Mm,
the future generations, it will have a definite better effect. But I think for the now generations that are now currently living, like I'd say everyone
mhm.
from 18 above, they'll experience some negatives effect with
I
it.
agree with that. Yeah, I mean, I just don't see the uniqueness here. I mean, I could say the same thing about baby boomers from the perspective of the GIs. I could say the same thing about, oh, let me pull up my stupid chart.
Yeah,
You know what I'm
the
talking
school
about?
point
Like, I
wasn't
could say
too
the same
big.
thing for Gen X as for the baby boomers. Or, oh, these millennials they have everything given to them when I had to do a paper route in the 1950s, right? Like, I don't get it, you know?
Mhm.
I
Yeah, the school point wasn't too big. It's just
mhm.
the lack of adaptation. Just like, yeah, they're self-conscious. They want to learn, but the school doesn't provide this. And I think also something that just back on the depression thing, just quick back. I
Yeah, sure.
personally think a teacher is a better therapist. I think therapists should be for grown-ups. But if a kid should has to see a therapist for some reason, they should go to their teacher. The difference, they have a personal bond to their teacher. I wouldn't say change your teacher every year. That's stupid. That won't bring you anything. You need a teacher for at least 3 years.
I mean,
Then you can have a switch.
I do 100% agree with you on the fact that we are medicalizing children. I do think that that's definitely something that's happening that, for better or for worse, right? For worse, right? in my opinion, is the medicalization of children and their psychological makeup. I do agree with that. However, um, I do want to kind of point out that the millennial generation is the one who started this, like what I like to call the participation trophy generation. Right? I was part of that. Growing up, you get a participation trophy for everything, and so I don't think that this is something that's like a new. I think this has been going on for decades now, and we're just seeing more and more evolution of that. And I actually think that now that we've sort of coped with this, call it less harsh teaching methods, no corporal punishment, whatever, right? This softer style of teaching. I think now that we're have been doing this for more time, that we are seeing a greater development to a society which doesn't accept sort of the older, hard ass type of ways of teaching. I think we're starting to see a development of that, and as time progresses, things will get better. But again, millennials, participation trophy generation, like this, not a Gen Z problem. This is like more of like the Gen Xers who started this thing, right?
Yeah. By the way, I do have an example for for Gen Z being spoiled in school.
Okay, go
So
ahead.
I should tell you, I'm in an apprenticeship, and it goes
Sure.
3 years. And in my school, it's quite a big school. We have about 3,000 students.
Oh wow,
The
that is good.
now, yes, about the last year that would they'd finish their apprenticeship next year in summer. They now, because of COVID, they're putting in a petition that they don't have to do the final exam. And so it's built up by final exam, history of your grades, and how you did in the courses that you visit throughout your apprenticeship. Like those courses teach you extra stuff than in school. They want that's removed, and they just get this red book which opens them doors to university. This thing could open them the door to university, and they didn't earn it. Our teacher on Friday told us, "Don't sign that because that's bullshit."
Well, I
That,
mean,
and those are Gen Zs, by the way.
well, yeah, but like any teenager doesn't want to do work, right? Like that's just how it is. You don't want to do what people tell you to do. You don't want to do work, and that's just a natural human uh sort of idea, right? If I don't have to do work, I'm not going to do it. People love to procrastinate. People like to be lazy. Working's hard. Why should I do work? I don't think this is a Gen Z problem. I think this is just a human problem.
Agreed, but it does say it does pinpoint. I'd say like you said, the GI generation.
Hmm.
I'd bet that generation would very less likely come to the idea to get because of a pandemic to not earn their red book that they
Sure.
made. And that's what I want to pinpoint about Generation Z, is being sensitive more in that way, and just want to be, they show more of their laziness.
Mhm. But I mean, we can even go back farther and, talk about like I guess they call it the lost generation, like 1883 to 1900, right? I mean, they didn't have running water. Like I
Mhm.
remember stories from my grandmother about when their, family, they finally got running water in their house and they didn't have to use an outhouse, right? Or they got married on a horse and buggy, right? They didn't have cars or trucks or things like that. So I mean, we can go back even farther and say, well, the fact that, these, GI generation has all these fancy cars and the telegraph and phone line, oh, not really phone line that time. But you know what I'm saying, right?
Yes, I
We
don't
can
know
go back
exactly.
farther and, the again, like the new generation is always viewed as not having it as hard as the previous one because in fact it's kind of true, right? Each generation as technology and society progresses doesn't have it as hard. And
Yes,
coping with that is just called, the progression of time. I don't
yes,
see, like that's kind of my point is I mean the hinge of my argument has got to be on this uniqueness point because I will agree with you that not wanting to take finals exams is kind of ridiculous, but I don't see this as being unique, right? I mean, I think if the pandemic happened during my schooling, uh, we would have the same type of crap, because you don't want to do work, right? So,
Yes.
I mean, spoiled, yes, but spoiled relative to say how the millennials were to Gen X or how the baby boomers were to the GI generation. I'm not sure if they're more spoiled, really. It's just different. And that's sort of my
Yes.
point. And I think, the social issues, which you call unnecessary, right? I mean, again, necessary from what perspective and unnecessary in comparison to what, right? I think the pandemic and raising concerns about that, and then, police violence, mass incarceration, all that isn't an unnecessary issue. I think it's just more public, and you're seeing a younger generation really had the opportunity for the first time really to have such public platforms to sort of express their own views that you didn't see previously. I'm thinking of like Kellyanne Conway's daughter posting on TikTok and Twitter and all that. Right beforehand, she wouldn't have had the opportunity to share that. And so that's what you're seeing. You're not seeing anything different. It's just public now. That's my point.
Okay, I see your point. I definitely see it, and I see where you come with it. I see what you want to achieve with it.
Mhm.
It suits very well, but I have still some stuff to talk about. Like
Sure, go ahead.
what I call unnecessary is mental health. Sure, the awareness has been raised. That's good,
Mhm.
but it's lost its potency because, like I said, every third person has a so-called depression, but
I
that's just being down. I would never. Just because you've been heartbroken doesn't mean you have a depression. You've just been hurt and you need some time to repair that. You just need to fill in void. That's basically this fake depression. It's a void, and they just wanna name this void, so they take the next best, and that's what they came up with: depression.
I mean, I am tempted to agree with you a bit on this topic. That the medicalization of children is bad. I think that you definitely, with the greater awareness, you do get these fake, you can call it, um, mental health disorders or whatever. Um, but on the other hand, right, I mean, this is again a generation that has more access to materials through the internet, right, about mental health disorders, right? Brain's not fully developed, right? They're still learning how to be human or how to be a person, right? And so it's just teenagers grappling with their own sort of consciousness. It's just their brain development trying to find a way to understand themselves, and that's just a natural thing that everyone goes through. And it just so happens that with the abundance of like clinical data and these clinical terms and the access to information just gives them a different vocabulary or a different way of speaking. And they'll just learn over time that the 1 in 3 people, right, a good chunk of those will just learn, well, that's just the ups and downs of living, and they just have to learn that over time. That's just being a teenager from my point of view.
Okay. By the way, can I tell you a little number that
Sure.
maybe it surprises you? More than 9 out of 10 Generation Zs have a have a depression, so to say.
What? Where are you getting this number? Because that is kind of ridiculous.
Yes, I googled it and I found that. Wait, where did I have this site? I think I had it here somewhere.
Yeah, that can't be correct.
More than it's APA.org.
Oh,
I
what?
could
That's a
I
bit.
could I could technically stream it if you want.
Yeah, if you want to, or send me the URL or whatever.
I'll stream it quick so everyone gets a view. So more than 9 in 10 Gen Z adults, 91%, said that they have experienced at least one physical or emotional symptom because of stress, such as feeling depressed or sad. So Gen Z is generally lacking something, and maybe something that has to do with that is that there's a void, like there's a void of knowledge. Like I definitely get your point, and I think your point is legitimate and it's valid, and it's almost like impossible to counter it. Basically, I'm just gonna provide more and more examples to it, which you then can tackle. But like this is something avoid, like a lack of knowledge. Like it's basically I'd maybe go a little bit political here. It's Gen Z being the most self-cautious one here, being being intentionally being kept stupid, not
Well,
to
I mean,
progress. Because
again, I think that another thing that you might want to consider on these sorts of issues is that with the awareness that's been raised about mental health and the breaking down of stigmatization around mental health, people will be more likely to be open and honest about how they're feeling or what they're doing and how they're doing and so forth. So it may not be the case that Gen Zers are more depressed per se, but they're just reporting it more than millennials, for example. I think everyone here can agree that we all felt at some point in our lives symptoms of depression or anxiety or so forth. I know I have hard trouble believing you're human if you haven't, right? And so I think
yes,
that maybe it's just the fact, again, the publicity of it, the fact that they're able to share more, feel more comfortable sharing is what leads to these sort of higher statistics. On the other hand, I just kind of have to agree with you that the medicalization of these things, the over medicalization of these is a significant problem, and I agree with you there. I don't think that the number of antidepressants, at least in the U.S., is ridiculous. For example, um, but I think that that's just again a unique challenge that the Gen Z faces is this increased medicalization that is a maybe unintended side effect of the more openness about it. But I think that being open about what your mental state is, as opposed to stigmatizing it, isn't necessarily a bad thing, right? Perhaps.
I get that somewhat. Um, so I have two questions.
Sure.
First question would be, then why do people feel the need to post a story on Instagram how they hurt themselves, like they cut themselves? Why is this something I have to, when I want to scroll casually and watch my influence, whatever they do, why do I have to see this in the middle of anything? Why? Why do I have to see somebody cutting and bleeding?
Oh, geez.
Yes,
So are there still emo kids around? Is that like still a thing?
I don't know.
Or because like I can
I'd
definitely think
say
about like the
I,
emo kids.
they've died out. I think it's something that's been
Yeah.
lost. I think
Uh,
it's
Trop
somewhat
just told
passed
me
over
yes, they still
into
exist. So that's good
because
to
he's
know.
probably one himself.
So yeah,
Uh,
so like I again like I think that well, okay, I will agree to you that like there is some type of like uh how to say it. So I do think that social media is bad in the sense that it does quantify, like with likes and stuff like that, and produces direct incentive for people to post this stuff to get attention, right? And like that's what they're doing. And I think that that's just more public now than it was before. Because like there's definitely people who did outlandish things in previous generations, like smoking weed, drinking, smoking cigarettes, for example. Yeah, smoking cigarettes is the best example, I think. So like before in older generations, that was like the rebellious activity that it would draw attention to yourself, and that was like your teenage rebellion, smoke cigs or whatever, don't smoke cigs. But like that type of behavior is sort of the same thing. And I think it's just the human need, especially when you're that young, to just people to pay attention to you and the struggle for recognition, right? I think that that's just being a teenager. Um, so I mean, I kind of agree with you that that's terrible and that Gen Z is, uniquely doing this as opposed to millennials or whatever, but
Mm,
I think it's just a symptom of being human as opposed to like a social sort of conditioning or a Gen Z-itis or some type of Gen
yeah.
Z disorder or whatever.
Okay, so
And it's more public.
next thing would be, so what I said in my proposition, that the issues, if they're
Mhm.
necessary or unnecessary, I'll say it like this: the rest of humanity has to deal with it. It's not them directly. They can. That's the thing. Gen Z likes to talk and talk about everything, and is very, very self conscious that they know what issues there are. They bring it up to the rest of humanity, and they have to bathe it out. Like Gen Z is a bit of lacking a bit of the initiative, so to say. Like, sure, we have some Gen Zs who took the initiative, Greta Thunberg being one of them,
Sure.
but I'd say for the most of Gen Z, it's a lack of initiative. And the
Mm,
rest of humanity, with the so-called depression, like people go to the doctor, and there's been medicine, or like ways to treat depression has been invented because of this, because let's say 20 years back, depression wasn't a real big thing, so it was just it was enough to go see a doctor or a therapist, and they talk with you a bit, and just having this more social sociality, like this is something with Gen Z. We're less likely to go to other people and have contact. Like, oh, I'm the best example. I don't go out at all. Like, the only contact I have is when I go to work with my family, and when I go to school. That's the only social contact I have. It's also because of the pandemic, but I say it's more of a. It wasn't this much in Gen Z, in the millennial generation, but it's all. I'll agree, it's because of the change of scenery, but it also has to do with Gen Z as it is.
mm. Well, we've been going for like about an hour now, I think.
Yes,
I think we've we
almost an hour.
I think we've covered like a lot of topics and a lot of ground, and I think the arguments have been sort of laid out here. Um, I would vote to move for closing statements.
Yeah, me too.
Okay. Do you want to go first? Or do you want me to go first? It's up to you.
You can go first.
All right. Cool. Yeah, I'll go first. So, sort of, I want to kind of sum up the general argument and the lay of the land, and sort of articulate why you're hopefully going to be voting for me and why I think that you should vote for me in this debate. Again, the proposition that we're talking about is, let me pull it up just to make sure I get it correct. Debate discussion pings. So is that Gen Z is a spoiled generation or too sensitive, and they create unnecessary issues which the rest of humanity has to deal with. I think that on the spoiled part, I think that this is not something that's unique to Generation Z. Again, I think that it's just new toys that look different, and we could say, and I think every generation can say that the one after theirs is more spoiled than the last, just because that's how society progresses and technology progresses and things tend to progress. I don't think that Generation Z is uniquely spoiled. In fact, I think that with some of the things that um, both me and my opponent have discussed, it actually produces some unique challenges that Gen Z has to face. And so their life might be even a little bit harder than sort of my millennial generation was. On the too sensitive point, I think we have to again keep in mind that when we're talking about Gen Z, we're mostly talking about teenagers and those types of, that age group where they haven't really mentally fully developed, and that they're still sort of trying to find themselves, and that this sort of happens among all generations across time. I mentioned the show Freaks and Geeks. This is like a prime example of like late 80s teenagers who are, blow stuff out of proportion or trying to find their way in life and become adults. So I don't think that Gen Z is uniquely positioned as being too sensitive. And I also do believe that the social media stuff is just giving them a voice, and so it's more public, and that's why we have this perception of them being too sensitive, when in reality they're not really more sensitive than the previous generation. On the creating unnecessary issues, Um, I think that really, I mean, as history moves forward, each society and each time period and each generation faces its own unique set of issues. And I think that with, the prevalence of cell phone recording, body cameras, and so forth, you're seeing a lot of, for example, on racial justice issues, you're seeing a lot of those issues come to the fore where previously they weren't as much talked about. And I don't think those are unnecessary issues. And I think that a lot of the issues, or mental health is another great example. With more awareness and more access to resources, we're seeing this issue really being taken up as like a live issue that we have to deal with. And so I think that to a certain extent, it's just a publicity issue. And I don't really think that a lot of the issues that Gen Zers are bringing up are necessarily unnecessary. Weird turn of phrase. But I think that, it will take time for them to, mature, develop, to be able to articulate in an adult manner what they were actually trying to say or what they were actually grappling with. I think anybody here in this chat who is not part of Gen Z can also say with certainty that they have a cringy high school photo or did something cringy in high school as well, or made too much ado about nothing as well in high school. So, again, if you vote for me, it's going to be because you believe that Gen Z isn't uniquely spoiled or uniquely sensitive than other generations, and that it's just a different look for the same sort of thing of being young and being human. And so, with that, I will close. And I'd like to thank both the audience and my opponent for this great debate. I enjoyed it tremendously.
Thanks for your closing statement. So I'll make mine now. So me and my opponent have went over the whole proposition. I'll start off with the spoiled generation point. Um, I'll have to pull that one to my opponent, but at core, It's still a spoiled generation. In it being due to lack of reasons, lack of parenting, and sure being enough toys, but I'd say due to the progression of history, the lack of parenting just causes this giving them stuff they want, so they're satisfied. It's about satisfying the youth, uh to make up for the lack of parenting. And with the too sensitive, we're shown with the Vietnam War, we need visual pictures, even Gen Z, but even the slightest touch, as I said, moves a boulder. Like it's a domino effect, so to speak. Um, sure, we can go back and look at history, but I'd still point out that they were very more sensitive than any other faction, mostly due to self consciousness, which is quite good, but they're being held back due to very other reasons, politics, education, and creating these unnecessary issues. I'd say it wasn't necessary to devalue the term depression. There are issues that they tackle, which is good, but at the end, as I pinpointed, it's talk, but then the rest of humanity has to deal with it. Like it's it's basically we say Black Lives Matter, we see someone die, we move and protest, and we leave it up to the others to do it, and we don't keep follow, we just let it slide until the next big thing happens, until the next black person dies and we get it on a video. That's what I'd bring to that issue. It's just it's a very broad topic. But yeah, I have to hand it for my opponent for bringing these good arguments and it not being directly unique, but it every generation in itself is unique with its problems. Sure, you can view it as a challenge, but I'd view it rather as issues we'd have to face and not as challenges. And also, I've had personal experience with it, so I can say that I've seen a lot of them fail and mostly see people dropping out and being at the end not coming further in life. Like I said, foundation is not laid. But I thank my opponent and I thank the audience for viewing. debating.